All right, we're making a little bit of progress here. I've got two of my, I'm going to call them coolant line brackets made. These brackets are just going to be so that I can run a screw through this into a tapped hole in the bracket so that I don't run self-tappers in and have the inside of the car looking like a porcupine. I just think it's going to be a whole lot, you know, look a little professional, So what I'm working on right now is figuring out how this third bracket's going to be made, what angles it needs to have. This is also going to hold up the sheet metal cover plate that's going to go over all this. That's why these have these ears right here. I'm going to use these two bolts to help hold the cover plate up. And this one will probably have a plate running at a little bit of an angle so that this cover plate will be higher than the cross member up here. That's my plan anyway. Let's see how it works out. The lines that are going to be run through here are going to be the two radiator lines, 2 lines for the heater, 2 fuel lines, and eventually 2 lines for air conditioning. The other lines are going to be ran over here in these leftover holes from the original fuel tank lines. That'll be a line to the vent tube at the top of the radiator and a line for the vacuum power booster for the brakes. Well, I don't think I've left any lines out. I think that's all there is. What I'm going to do now is make some guesses as to where this has got to be bent, about how long it's going to have to be, measure it out in a piece of steel, cut it, and hope it's right. I'm going to make my sheet metal plate 8.5 inches wide all the way from the front to the back, which means it will need an ear that sticks out far enough, of course, to put a hole in, bolt it to. And it's starting to look something like this. Kind of hard to hold it all up in there and keep it straight, but well, this is going to be a little further forward. That'll be something like that. That'll go over there like that, and it'll have something to bolt to like that. That's a little bit too long yet, but hey, it's getting there. Oh yeah, and a tab to hold it to that bolt hole so it doesn't wobble around on the top. So to figure all this out, I just clamped this little ruler right up here. This is about where the edge of my sheet metal will run. My mounting point's going to be welded on right about there, and that gives me a good 3 inches or so higher than this, so anything that comes under through the car won't catch at the front edge. Or run something like that right there. Well, something like that. All right, that's starting to look like it. That needs to be a little shorter, but you know, just cardboard. Got to leave a little gap behind it so that when I mount the clamps to this, there's room for the screw to go through behind and not hit the floor pan. Have to make my side braces here, my mount points. That one's going to be fairly easy. This one on this side, going to be a little bit of a curve to it because this floor has all kinds of curves, but I think it's going to work. Yep, I think that's about level and straight. And we had to climb up inside the car, chop out a little bit of sound deadening, so, well, you know, so we don't set the whole thing on fire. So after some bending, some cutting, and some tapping, we got our little plates here ready to be tacked in place. We just got to figure out how we're going to catch that bolt up there and be able to put this up and in, and that's going to be done with this little bracket right here. Of course, not made out of cardboard. That slot will allow me to put it up above it, slide it back, put these bolts in, all that good stuff. Well, everything's cut out, a couple of tack welds in place. Now we're going to find out if I can get it out and put it back in. If the slot is long enough at the top, it should work. All right, it works. Bending these brackets, welding them, and getting these mounting points right here put on was just the start of the problems. Now what I have to do is drill and tap holes for each one of these clamps, and I'm just doing that by marking the approximate location of each clamp. And because there's so much room in this one, I got to keep everything tight together because I still have 2 heater hoses to go through here and eventually 2 air conditioning lines. So some of these are going to be set like this is going to be over the top of that, so that screw has to be put in, and then this one has to be put on after that one's in. So don't have much room to work around this one, but it's going to work. I swear it's going to work. All right, well, maybe it'll work. I think we'll move that one out just a little bit away from that. So when I screw them together, I don't end up with them so tight together. That'll work. A little hammer for a little punch mark. Tap a hole. Do that about, well, each one of these clamps is going to need this done about 6 or 7 times for all the lines that are going to go through it. That's 3 clamps, and that's just one part of the project. In order to make my custom fuel line clamps so that I don't have to use 2 separate clamps to hold the fuel line on, I'm reshaping a 5/8 clamp around 2 bolts. It takes a little bit of work, but it does work in the end, and it's a lot better than having to have 2 separate clamps. I tried it with a 15mm clamp. I had to order 5/8 because 15mm was a little bit too small. But once you get the 2 bolts in here and get it shaped around, it's easy to get it shaped around there. The tricky part is getting the 2 bolts in there to start with. Threading it through there isn't hurting that rubber at all. It's not like it's really got any pressure, it just won't slide in there. And once it's through there, it slides right on in. And we just lay it in the vise, try to keep it flat, straight, and all that good stuff. Presto. Custom fuel line holder. And to finish off my custom dual line clamp here, I'll just put a small piece of rubber in between the 2 lines. It always goes easier when the camera's not running. And you may have noticed there's still a few lines missing, like the heater hoses and all that I talked about, heater hoses and air conditioning. They will be done at a later time. I wanted to get the main lines out of the way, and then I'll go back and do those. And I might have just cross-threaded that, or there's something caught in the hole, because that didn't go in quite right. Back it out and check it, see what's going on. It looks straight. Must be something caught in the hole. Every time you do it with the camera on, something like this happens, right? Yeah, we'll check it by cleaning it out with a tap. Yeah. Well, they're clean and straight now. Maybe. Well, I honestly didn't know if I would ever see lines actually mounted up in there like that. And a couple brackets at the front to hold the radiator tubes near the radiator. And one last small bracket at the rear needs to be welded on. This bracket's actually going to hold the heater hoses right here so they don't vibrate around and crack. Last couple of welds here. This will finish up the brackets at the rear of the car. Then I've just got a couple brackets to do at the front. 2 for the heater hose and 2 to hold the radiator return and the vacuum booster line to the brakes. Alright, now all I got to do is make some heater hoses. Bent the heater lines by hand. I didn't have a tubing bender of this size. None of the bends were too tight, so it worked out pretty well. Putting my homemade crimping pliers to work here. This is just one of the pairs of crimping pliers that I've made out of whatever was around. Works pretty good. Good enough for this job. Well, nothing too exciting has been happening here. Just some hand bent lines for my heater hoses. I've got my fuel line sitting right here, wiggling around a little bit. And I need to make a bracket to hold them so they don't vibrate, shake, and end up cracking the line. So what I'm going to do is take a piece of cardboard. I'm going to work off this bolt right here and a bolt that's right behind here. Make a bracket that I can put clamps on that hold both of these sets of lines. Hopefully that's going to work. This first attempt is going to be just a wild guess at the shape of it, and then I'll try another one out of cardboard, and eventually I'll get to a point where I can make one out of steel. All right, 17 attempts later, maybe more, and I've gone back to one of the earlier pieces of cardboard because it fit better than the last one I made, and something like that. Those 2 fuel lines will fasten right there, and this one will fasten here, and this one will fasten right here. Now if I can make that out of metal and it still fits, well, not exactly this, but it's pretty close. This sheet metal brake was not exactly designed to do this kind of metal. It was made to do real heavy duty stuff, but I made it so I could do both heavy duty and light duty bending. And it'll bend some heavy steel. I don't know if it's going to bend that because I don't have the fingers to get around it. Yep, it ain't gonna bend that. I'm gonna have to bend that manually. Yep, can't bend it because that's gonna stick into whatever I use. Needs fingers on this side too. Complete. All right, well, over to the vise. Line it up and hope for the best. Almost can't bend it in the vise, coming against down there. Make sure I bend it the right direction. The distance of this bend is not super critical, it's just for spacing. Dogs are going crazy out there, they can hear a fire truck. Oops, may have overbent that a bit. It'll be okay. After a wee bit of adjusting with a hammer, it's got the right angle to it, I think. Looks good to me. Starting to get there. Needs to have a curve in it here, but we'll figure that out over at the car. After a bit of bending and tweaking and rebending, I did have to take this bend out and redo it. But it seems like it is just about what I want it to be. And now all I've got to do is drill some holes so I can put some clamps on it, put some nut plates on it, etc., paint it, and it'll be good to go. Well, let's take a look at what's going on underneath here. I've got a stock radiator in it. I've got a Mishimoto radiator that I'm going to put in it, but I'm leaving the stock one in it for now while I work on it, stuff like that. But what I had is everything that's cool is up front, like the radiator, and you got the heater that takes heat out of the coolant, and all that's up front. So I had to do a few brackets, tubes, such as that, to get everything from the front to the back. This is a return line to the block from the coolant container. This is the return line from the radiator that gets all the steam and such off the top of the radiator, brings it back to the coolant reservoir. Those lines come around here and head up towards the reservoir. This is the return line coming from the radiator. This is the return vent line from the top of the block. Those both go together and they go back into the top of the reservoir. And then this line is the one I just showed you down underneath that goes back to the block. So this coolant reservoir's main function is to hold a little bit of coolant, but it's to separate the steam and vapors from the water and put it back into the coolant system. This is a schematic of how the coolant system works. Well, how I hope it's going to work. I haven't put water in this thing yet. This is the original filler cap on the LS4 being tapped out to 1-inch pipe threads so I could put a 1-inch plug in it. This cap isn't going to be needed anymore because I'll be able to fill it through the coolant reservoir. There's a small tube just below where this pipe plug is being put in that I'll use as a vent to vent this back to the coolant reservoir. That'll get rid of any steam that accumulates in this area. A little sealant on the threads, tightened with a wrench, and put the cap on to finish it up. I was getting real close to filling this thing up with coolant, and I realized there's one more thing it's going to need. It's going to need a couple of drain fittings. And the reason I say a couple of drain fittings is because there's quite a bit of line and a few low spots in it that are going to have coolant left in them if you just drain it from one point. And just popping a radiator hose loose usually makes a mess trying to drain coolant. So I'm going to put a couple drain fittings in it, fill it with coolant, and see what happens next. All right, like, subscribe, share, leave a comment, and as always, thanks for watching.